factory brewery building just on the street on this side. So we've decided to organise this talk as part of our Edinburgh 900 celebration. So we were very lucky to receive funding from the City of Edinburgh Council to take part in the Edinburgh 900 celebrations, and our project is called 900 Stories in Print, and we're aiming to collect 900 stories about this side of Edinburgh, so very much Fountainbridge, Dalrymple, sort of the more extended west of Edinburgh, and stories can be about the past, so the history of the neighbourhood, but also about the present and about hopes for the future, and everyone has stories. So as part of this project, we're doing several different things, and one of them is, I'm so excited about this, is please come through.
Might need for the chair.
Yes.
You can sit here.
Oh. Yeah, so part of this is organising this talk that I'm very, very excited about. So I reached out to Mo to know more about the library being the other sort of heritage building within this neighbourhood. And then I'm so delighted that Strang decided to give this talk about the history of this beautiful building. So I'd just like to thank Mo for facilitating this with me, and obviously Alice. And Alice, for you don't know, if you don't, but she's senior curator in Scottish, modern Scottish and British art. She used to work in National Galleries of Scotland, and she has also been specialising in advising the Library Terminal Auction House. She's now working to freelance and independent painting, and I'm so glad that she decided to present this talk. So I'm going to leave it with her, and if you have any questions, do let me know at the end. I've left in the other room, which there's still a bit of food and drinks for everyone. I've left a note and some pieces of paper for any of you to share any memories you have or stories you have about this neighbourhood. You can write them down, or there's a QR code that opens a form and you can type them up. And you print them. But yeah, thank you so much for coming, and thank you, Alice. Thank you.
Hello everyone, thanks for coming out on such a cold night. I'd just like to thank Mo and Lara for inviting me to give this talk, which I gave a couple of years ago, having completely fallen in love with this building. It is officially my happy place, and I hope I can explain why in the next 45 minutes or so. I've been using the library for over 20 years, and I first became interested in the building itself because of the sculptures on its facade outside. Which are by the Scottish sculptor Charles Dorville Pilkington Jackson, who I'm sure just called Pilkington Jackson. I soon realised that the building is a rare and important example of Scottish modern architecture. Its architect was John A. W. Grant, and it was built between 1937 and 1940, and opened to the public on the 11th of March 1940. Making it, or let's do a quick calculation, I can't work out how many years old it is, you can do that. And it's a Category B listed building. It dates from a short and exceptional period in Scottish architecture, when the country's economic difficulties of earlier in the decade had eased somewhat, and before the outbreak of World War II. When it opened, it was a state-of-the-art library, and it continues to serve the local community today. So obviously it's dark and freezing, so we didn't start outside. So I'll give you a sort of virtual tour of the site and the building. So as you know, it's located on the corners of Dundee Street and Murdoch Terrace here in Fountainbridge. And this street is part of the long Fountainbridge, which goes right into the centre of town. And it's been known as West Fountainbridge since 1804. And this part of it is named Dundee Street, part of the city. There are two stories about the name Fountainbridge. One is that the bridge was one from the early 18th century at the head of Grove Street, which crossed Dalrymple Burn. And the burn ran from the Burlock, where the meadows now are, via Lochrin, to the water of Leith at Coleridge near Rosebud. The fountain of Fountainbridge was a nearby 18th century fountain and well. Alternatively, the bridge over the burn was known as the Foul Bridge, as the river was a common sewer and was known as Foul Burn. After 1735, the name Fountainbridge became more common, named after the fountain or well near the bridge, whose water was unpolluted. Fountainbridge was an important road, the main entrance to Edinburgh through the West Port and into the Grass Market. By the 1930s, this part of Fountainbridge was a densely populated, industrialised area. The industries included rubber factories, where Edinburgh Printmakers is now based, slaughterhouses, cooperative warehousing and brewing, and the industrial buildings of the north side of Dundee Street over here have all been demolished since the library was built. So the site that the library is built on is quite an imposing corner site. So there's a slope down Murdoch Terrace to the left, with Dundee Street on the right. And I think the first impression of the building is really that it's dignified and it's ordered and it's symmetrical, with this lovely tower in the middle, and it's flanked either side with wings. So, for want of a better expression, I call it Art Deco infused neoclassical. The first impression really is windows. They're basically 2 stories high, with bronze-plated steel frames, but they've got Georgian-sized panements, so there's a sort of reference to the new town there. And throughout the building, inside now, as you can see in this room here, there's a huge emphasis on natural light, in contrast to the working and living conditions of the local community in the 1930s. And you can see through the corner of the first floor, it's a very open building of the period. If you think about the Central Library and the National Library on George IV Bridge, they're much more closed. But this is a very open and welcoming architecture. I think the second impression is of order. So you've got the 3 windows of the stair tower, you've got the pattern of tripartite windows with a single either side of elevation windows and of their panes. So it's talking about, it's like the new town, it's about almost that Enlightenment philosophy of order and civilization. So we've got 5 windows along the top floors and 3 sets at the very top of the tower. And equal status is given to both streets, that's quite unusual. Dundee Street Northwest isn't given prominence, but Murdoch Terrace on the northeast is not presented as a side street, so it's kind of balanced and equal. The building itself is constructed around a steel frame, and it's that makes windows of that size and ratio of window to stone possible, with an ashlar, that's dressed, cut, worked sandstone outer skin, sort of stone cladding, and then it's got reinforced concrete floors. So it's using relatively modern construction techniques. It's also in proportion to the surrounding tenements, unlike some new developments at the bottom of Dalware or Haymarket Station, that you mentioned. So it's not showing off, it's respectful to its surroundings. So we've got this sort of strong cornice at a height to match the top of the tenements, and plus the deliberate use of the cement stone to blend in. And there's this giant 2-storey pilaster order, and sort of stylised, iconic pilasters. So you've got 3 stories at the front, but it's actually stepped at the back. So the scrapyard at the back is now closed, but when I was doing the original research of this, I went and knocked on the door and asked if I could sort of walk through the yard to see the back of the building. And to my delight, the chap who was in the hut said, "Oh yes, and I'm with you, tell me more about the building. I've spent, half my working days looking at the back of it." So that was very encouraging. So at the back, it's actually stepped so that the top floor is only 1 room deep. And this allows for lay or flat and skylights to be pitched above the first and second floor, again, to allow for maximum light. So we've got metal panels between the first and second floors, with papyrus from which paper is made, linking it to books and reading. plus a central panel by Pilkington Jackson, we'll come on to that later, explicitly stating the purpose of the building. There's a working man who's wearing a flat cap reading, whilst a librarian by a bookcase hands books to a mother and child. So it's deliberately contemporary people wearing ordinary clothes. It's not sort of classical allegory as you get, for example, on the facade of the National Library. So the whole design is about it being a civic building for public well-being. There are a few allowances for the sloping ground. So you see the size of the pair of windows to the left and right of the main entrance, plus the 4 basement windows along Dundee streets, and the sort of differing heights of the entrance and exits on the terraces of that slope. Now the tower is pure 1930s. We've got 2 neoclassical frontages linked by a tower, inspired by contemporary international architecture. We've got a chamfered corner, that's where the corner is cut off, which is a sort of elegant way of turning a corner. And there is a sense of American architecture here, including Frank Lloyd Wright and Louis Sullivan, who is the father of the skyscraper, which would have been known to Scottish architects through magazines. There's a sense of height and grandeur, emphasised by those elongated windows, stretching over 2.5 floors. There's plain keystones of the window frames, and a relatively modest main entrance with wrought iron balcony and lamps. And you've got up there at the top of the tower, towards the top of the tower, a god holding a flaming torch and book, or light, learning, education, plus the literal carving above the front door of a fountain under a bridge over the main entrance, with the date 1989. Please remember 1989. So on the ground floor, where we are now, was the Nelson Hall. That's next door. That was the Nelson Hall and the games room. And the room that we're in at the moment was the newspaper room. I'm going to tell you more about all of these in a bit. The first floor, the whole thing was open plan, and that was a home reading section and a lending section. And the top floor, that's just 1 room deep, on the Murdoch Terrace side was a reference library, and on the Dundee Street was a children's library. And the main entrance in the tower, that lovely terrace gave access to and this is just showing you a bit the Dundee Street elevation with all that wonderful glazing. You can just see that the sort of back there, and this is me in the scrapyard looking at the back of the building. Again, that wonderful emphasis on all that glazing. So the stone cladding, which is quite expensive, actually continues around for almost half of the elevation. And thereafter, there's sort of cheaper rendered brick. There's no need for decoration in the back, because it will only be seen by people looking out of the back windows of the tenements. But there remains this emphasis on the windows, and again, very ordered groups of 3, sometimes flanked by single windows. And for me, really, internally, the most amazing feature, this wonderful stairwell. And I just wondered, how many of you came in through that corner entrance tonight? Yes, always do that, unless you need the ramp up to the side room. And how many of you, when you came in, looked up? Always do that. Lift your heart. Right. So I called this talk The Publisher, the Architect, and the Sculptor. And this is the publisher. He's called Thomas Nelson. He's born in Edinburgh in 1822. He was educated at the high school. At the age of 17, joined the family business, Thomas Nelson and Sons Limited. The company had been set up by his father, Thomas Nelson Sr., in 1798 as a second-hand bookshop at 2 West Bow. And it developed into a printers and publishers, and was Arthur Conan Doyle's first publisher. He is of Sherlock Holmes fame, and it still exists today as a subsidiary of HarperCollins. And here is Thomas Nelson, and here are Nelson's parkside printing works on Dalkeith Road. which is just on the corner opposite the Commonwealth building, Commonwealth Pool. And so that's actually what was it the Scottish Widows building, which is an important building in its own right, done by, I think, Basil Spencer's partners. So Thomas Nelson Jr. worked very hard, was very successful, and became extremely wealthy. And he died in Edinburgh in 1892. His obituary in the Scotsman declared, he was indefatigable, persistent, strong-willed. Unfortunately for himself, he had no power of delegation. He kept everything, even to the minutest of details, in his own hands. This often put a severe strain on him and overtaxed his powers, so he basically worked himself to death. But he left a bequest, the Thomas Nelson bequest, of £50,000. Remember, this is in 1892, so that's a significant sum of money, to build Nelson Halls in Edinburgh. And his bequest stated that the money should be devoted to providing a shelter where the respectable poor might spend their leisure hours, and also where they could get newspapers, books, periodicals, pictorial reading, and conversation with one another. He desired them to be in the districts where they were most wanted and would be most used. He wanted no monument for himself. In the meantime, the Central Library had opened in 1890 and had been so successful that Edinburgh Corporation wanted to start opening branch libraries. The trustees of the Thomas Nelson bequest joined up with the Public Libraries Committee so that a recreation hall could be combined with a free library, which is not normal at times, normally based on a subscription basis, so you had to have the funds to pay a monthly subscription in order to borrow books. And the first Nelson Hall and first branch library opened on this site in 1897 as the Nelson Hall and West Branch Public Library. And all we know of it is these two images on the left-hand side. So its architect was Harry Ramsay Taylor of Lessels and Taylor, 50 George Street. And it had 2 stories to Dunley Street and 1 on Murdoch Terrace. On the left was a reading room, in the centre was a London library, and on the right was a Nelson Hall as a recreation hall and newsroom, which measured 75 foot long, so it was a substantial building, 33 foot wide and 37 feet high. The second floor consisted of staff and committee rooms, stores, and the caretaker's house. In 1907, a juvenile library opened on the second story with an initial stock of 613 volumes. The library rooms were rented from the Nelson trustees, and a librarian supervised the whole building. There's a lovely letter in a file here from James Nichol of 1997, and he recalled, I was brought up at 11 Murdoch Terrace. I was born there in 1923. I vividly remember the old library. I was 15 when it was demolished, and especially the large man who was either a caretaker or a porter, but he kept all of us boys in place, and we very soon knew the meaning of quiet reading. We were so fortunate to have the library at the foot of the street, and at the time did not fully appreciate it. Many a winter's evening we would spend going through the books in the youth section, especially the books with maps and stories all about Canada and its vast open lands, and of course the USA directly mentioned Edinburgh. So you can see the layout of that original library there, and partway through its demolition at the lower left. So the Nelson Hall here was used for a variety of forms of entertainment, starting with a lecture on the day the original building opened on the 10th of May 1897 by John Harrison, called Some Historical Events Enacted in Edinburgh. In 1901, Robert Finney McEwen, a Nelson trustee, initiated the celebrated Nelson Hall concerts, and the first one was held in the original building on the 21st of February that year. A Beckstein concert grand piano was brought in and put on stage for the first concert, which featured a soprano, baritone, violinist, and pianist, and featured music by Corelli, Beethoven, and choirs. There is a plaque just before the doors into the library, you probably walked past it many, many times, to commemorate the fact that the first concert was held here. And the plaque is by the Scottish sculptor Hugh Lorimer, and was unveiled in 1945. 3 other Nelson Halls were built in Edinburgh. The others were the Nelson Hall and North Branch Public Library, now known as Stockbridge Library in Hamilton Place, the Nelson Hall on MacDonald Road in the corner of Heath Walk, now MacDonald Library, the Nelson Hall Community Centre on Spitalfield Crescent, and that opened in 1914, just up from Thomas Nelson's home and the Nelson Printing Press, which doesn't have a library, it's simply the hall, the recreation hall. And all the Nelson halls are still in use, so what a wonderful legacy. So the decision, the Nelson Hall and West Branch Library proved to be too popular for its own good. The facilities soon proved to be too small for the local population, and it was reported that 3 times more people wanted to visit than could fit inside, whilst the condition of the building began to deteriorate. Measures were taken, including those reported in 1924. The junior edition, which had always been subject to abuse from gangs of boys spent on mischief rather than on reading, had deteriorated into a dingy and gloomy condition. It was redecorated, lighting improved, chairs and tables installed, and a system of admission by tickets introduced. However, by the mid-1930s, spiralling repair costs and a shortage of space led to calls for the building of a new library. And at about the same time, in 1935, the Nelson trustees transferred to the corporation the Nelson Halls and the funds which were invested for their maintenance to be managed by the Public Libraries Committee. This meant that the council could decide by itself what to do with Dundee Street and the funds by which to achieve it. By 1940, the trust's capital was £56,000, so originally it was 50, and even after building all these Nelson Halls, it had obviously been so well looked after that it was now worth more. There was also a lucky coming together of 3 particularly dynamic men crucial to this story. So we've got Ebenezer James McRae at the top, Ernest Albert Savage, who's in the lower left-hand photo, and Kenneth Sanderson on the right-hand side. Now, McRae was Edinburgh City's architect from 1925 until his retirement in 1946, and I think there's going to be an exhibition about what he did for the city at the People's Museum next year, which I'm delighted to hear. He was committed to urban planning with an emphasis on social housing developments, and under his tenure, scores of new housing estates were built, offering clean, spacious and affordable homes for the working classes, creating public housing rather than the council subsidising private houses for rent. And he was responsible for the burgeoning housing developments at Nintry, Craig Miller, Prestonfield, Hilton, Stenhouse, Stockton, and numerous other areas. Over 12,000 homes were built during his tenure. And in addition to the housing estates, McRae oversaw the construction of many city landmarks, including the power station and outdoor pool at Portobello, and built schools, nursing homes, libraries, public lavatories, and an extension to Edinburgh City Chambers. So I think we've got a lot to thank McRae for. Savage was the second principal librarian of Edinburgh Public Libraries between 1922 and his retirement 20 years later. He wrote extensively on libraries, library science, and librarianship. Amongst his innovations was the conversion of Edinburgh libraries from closed to open access, so that you could browse and choose books for yourself, rather than selecting something for a colleague and requesting it from the librarian. And this happened here at the West Branch in 1925. And it was his concept of a totally up-to-date library, which was realised in the building. Sanderson was an Edinburgh solicitor who contributed hugely to the capital's civic life, including as a trustee of the National Galleries of Scotland, to whom he bequeathed his collection. And most relevant to us, as chairman of the Public Libraries Committee for over 40 years. So by 1934, almost 270,000 books had been issued from the West Branch Library, but book accommodation was very poor. There was insufficient space for readers and none for reference books, while staff accommodation and the reading room were in a pretty shabby state. Although £1,000 had been set aside for repairs and redecoration, between them McRae, Savage and Sanderson were able to envision, steer and accomplish its demolition and the construction of Fountainbridge Library. It was decided to stick with the original site, but to create a bigger building with a floor below the level of the street, plus extending in part to 3 stories. At a meeting of the Lord Provost Committee of the Town Council of Edinburgh on the 4th of March 1937, a motion to demolish the original building and to reconstruct a new one was carried by 13 votes to 7. The library was built during a brief golden period of the 1930s, as I said, when the worst economic difficulties of the decade had eased and before the outbreak of World War II. And it was a time of mass industrial unemployment, as well as new suburban housing estates, cars, radios, and labour-saving domestic appliances. It was a period of glamour, the golden age of the cruise ship and sophisticated cigarette smoking versus poverty and the means test. Popular entertainment centred on the theatre, especially variety and review, radio, cinema, dance halls, and seaside pavilions like the Portobello Nido, which was built in 1936. Fresh air and exercise were all the rage, including the Keep Fit, Body Beautiful movement, while sunbathing became a cult, and roof gardens, balconies, and wraparound windows all became popular. Hiking, youth hostels, and holiday camps got people active outdoors, whilst football, horse, and greyhound racing and ice skating were all enjoyed as never before. And Murrayfield Ice Rink is another wonderful example of 1930s architecture. And the seats around the rink are protected as wonderful 1930s examples. And I think that people in those days were happy to put up with more discomfort than they wanted to do. In this pre-television era, newspapers were at their peak readership, including popular illustrated ones, and played a role in current affairs that is difficult for us to comprehend now in the day of Twitter and Instagram. Hence the popularity of newspaper reading rooms in libraries. Of course, we have computers now and internet access. In terms of 1930s architecture, here are a couple of local examples. We've got the former Alfa Romeo showroom on Anglia Park Terrace, which is now a sofa shop, and the Tivoli Cinema on Borby Road, which is now a church. And Scotland's most prominent building of the decade was St Andrew's House, constructed between 1934 and 39 by Thomas S. Tate on Regent Road, on the site of the former Carlton Jail. And this is the award-winning Westport model village, built for miners near Falkirk, whose architect was John A. W. Grant. So in November 1936, Grant was appointed architect of the new library. He was born in Inverness and is believed to have been an apprentice and an assistant at Honeyman, Peppy and Mackintosh in Glasgow, Charter and Mackintosh, and also an apprentice before the First World War. He moved to Edinburgh after the war and in 1936 established his own practice based at 25 Rutland Square. He specialised in social housing schemes such as Muirhead Council housing for Tree throughout the 1930s and Westport, which won a Saltire Society housing commendation in 1937. So Grant would have known McRae through their shared interest in social housing. And after World War II, in Edinburgh, Grant was responsible for housing in North Muirhouse, West Muirhouse and Clermiston housing scheme, as well as in Moordown and Gilmerton. So another person who shaped the city. And Fountainbridge Library is actually the only public building that Grant designed. Grant's plans for the new library, based on Savage's requirements, were approved in March 1937. A budget of £25,200 was agreed for the demolition and rebuilding of the library, plus £1,500 for furniture and furnishings, plus architect and surveyor fees. More on this to come. In August 1937, tenders were invited for the work involved, including demolition, mason and brick, reinforced concrete, carpenter and joiner, glazier, asphalt, plaster, terrazzo, so on and so on. On the 10th of March 1937, the last Nelson Hall concert was held before closure. Readers were advised that books would be issued until the 28th of September and could be returned until the 9th of October 1937. Thereafter, returns had to be made to the Central Library, but reader tickets were valid at Central, Morningside and Balgreen libraries, and all the other branch libraries which had opened since the first West Branch Library here. Demolition of the original building began immediately after closure. On 22nd of October, the resultant materials were advertised as cheap for immediate removal and included panelling and cupboards, leaded glass, screens and sashes, plate glass windows, and so on. As James Nicholl, remember the boy who talked about coming here when he was little, recalled, the old library was such a formidable building we could not believe it was going to be knocked down. But of course we could not comprehend that another library would grow up in its place. I well remember the sale of all the fixtures, doors, beams, panelling, all laid out for inspection by prospective buyers. It did not seem to take long to sell off all these lovely doors and fixtures, and we were left with this immense hole in the ground. They erected a barricade around the large hole, and of course my friends and I were not content until we were down inside, much to the annoyance of the night watchman, who had to leave his shelter to come and chase us away. So by September 1937, the tenders for the new building had been awarded, including on the right hand side. Mason and brickwork, carpenter and joiner work, glazier work, asphalt work, plumber, electrical and so on. But it was not until July 1939 that the painter work contract was finally awarded to a woman, Agnes McCallum Grant, for £517. Here are two drawings of the planned new building, and it's very true to what was realised. We think the one on the left was exhibited by Grant in the 1938 Royal Scottish Academy exhibition. And here are a couple of photographs of it during construction. The library was closed from the 10th of October 1937 until it reopened on the 11th of March 1914, so for 2 years and 5 months. And yeah, here we see it being built. Inevitably, there were delays, which led to complaints, most notably by the men of the area. On the 27th of November 1937, a letter was published in the Edinburgh Evening News which asked, "May I also appeal for accommodation for the older men who have been deprived of their rendezvous in the west of Edinburgh owing to the demolition of the Nelson Library? What about a spare room in the corporation? Cooking department near Grove Street, where at present part of the building is occupied by youths out of employment? Surely, if such a concession is granted to these youths, why is an effort not made to accommodate the men on whose behalf I am appealing? What about it, West Edinburgh Town Council?" But I think that gives you an idea of really how popular and how well used the facilities were and remain today. Look at us. So rebuilding commenced in December 1937, and the foundations have been completed by March 1938. And we can understand Savage's vision for a modern library realised by Grant through Grant's architectural plans for the new building, which are in the Central Library, and also a wonderful set of photographs of the library when it opens in 1940. And for those of you who didn't see, there's some great information panels on the other side of this wall with those photographs and newspaper cuttings, and all the lovely food and drink there. The main framework of the building, including the floors and roofs, is constructed of reinforced concrete, faced externally with darn stone. And the Edinburgh Evening News reported the heating system is modern. Ventilation from the windows is supplemented by a system of fans which draw out used air. The building was to consist of, on the ground floor, a large games and concert hall next door, with platform, which doesn't exist anymore, an anteroom, which is now the staff room, and also this large newsroom where we are. The first floor, do you remember the whole floor was an open access landing library. The second floor was the reference room and the children's room. And the basement, staff rooms and boiler house, with that emphasis on natural light and fresh air throughout. And you get a lot of internal glazing, like here as well, just again to add to that sense of openness and light. The back elevation, partly synthetic stone and rough The roof of reinforced concrete finished with asphalt, and all public rooms floored with cork tiles. So presumably that's what's underneath this green carpet. So the stairwell, by placing wings on either side of that corner stair tower, allows for good circulation. You've got to bear in mind that 400 people could attend the concerts in the room next door. So you needed a building that allowed for a sort of efficient flow of people like a school building. And this gives the biggest possible floor space in the wings. And a spiral like this is very much like Frank Lloyd Wright's Guggenheim Museum in New York, for any of you that know that. And it sort of enjoys the simplicity of a set of strict rules. So it looks beautifully cantilevered stairs. That means that they come out of the walls, not spiralling out from the central core. And it's an octagonal shape, which is repeated elsewhere in the building. When you go back through into the library, you'll see that the columns in that room are octagonal as well. There's a wonderful rhythm of the stairwell drawing you up, which emphasises circulation and movement. And there's this sort of solid balustrade with the bronze railings above, which is expensive. You know, they put money into this. And then there's finials, there's little bumps along the way to stop people sliding down. And there's lotus finials at the end, and sadly one of them was stolen not so long ago. We don't have the original lights still, they would have been bronze and smarter. And there's this urge, I think, to look up to this wonderful octagonal skylight, which gives lights, and also these elongated windows. And they're triple-stepped, like the door frames. And then if you look down, you see on the upper right, there's a company called the Granolithic firm made the terrazzo, which you see in a lot of tenement stairwells, which is pretty much indestructible and also easy to clean. And you see the patterning of the floor, maybe see it at the bottom here, which kind of divides it up into like an entrance to go through that door and an entrance to go through that door. And then at the corner entrance, you can just see the remains of where there used to be revolving turnstiles when you came in. And in fact, when you come on the left-hand side, there's a loo and a basin, and that is used for rubbish, isn't it? But you can maybe take a little peek, because the original fittings are still there. And there was no lift. That was a later addition, so all those children who had to climb to the top floor, crowns and things, had to be left downstairs. So this is climbing up. Mo and I have crawled all over this building, haven't we? And you can get right up. So this is the top of that skylight. And these are the three sets of little windows that you see at the very top of the tower. So, and there's a view out over to St Mary's on Palmerston Place from one of those windows. So it's a real treat to go up there. And then the centre of it all, this timber reception desk and office for the caretaker, slightly sadly just closed up at the moment. And this really was the control hub of the whole building. So you had, this was the sort of welcome, this was the main entrance, the front counter. And there would have been a radiator underneath that front. And then there's a tube system, there's one tube left on the inside, a bit like Jenna and Asta's, Jenna's and Fraser's have, and that actually Asta still does have, where you can shoot chitties and cash and things to connect with the first and second story, so you can be sending messages up and down. The ticket window, so again, you might not have noticed it, but there's one on either side of the, if you go in the reading rooms, if you first come into the library to your direct right, there's a little window there that connects into the caretaker with one level plate that's up and down. So again, you could ask tickets and things. And there was the equivalent on this side, which is now blocked by the lift shaft. And then, again, the original light panels, which exists here, and then a modern one has been sort of slapped on top. But it meant that the caretaker could turn all the lights in the whole building on and off from that one place. Now this, the library, you might have seen a plaque in the entrance hall with the with the inscription "Nisi Dominus Frustra," which means "Without God we can do nothing." The Fountainbridge Public Library was opened by the Right Honourable Henry Steele, Lord Provost of Edinburgh, on the 11th of March 1940. Remember I talked about the carving in 1839? Kenneth Sanderson, Chairman of the Libraries Committee, and John A.W. Grant, Architect. And here we have what we now know as the main library building, as it was as the Nelson Hall in 1940. And the thing that has really made this research possible is this wonderful set of photographs that were commissioned on the opening of the library. People were very proud of it, and the plans of the building. So you see, again, this wonderful emphasis on the glazing, the internal glazing, so we're just through that glazing with the glazing there. Here's the stage that no longer exists. Here it is set out for the men for playing cards and dominoes. There was only a gentleman's lavatory of this room, and then it could be reconfigured into seat 400 for concerts, and the chair stores in the basement. And these are the octagonal columns that I mentioned earlier. So the order of the outside of the building is maintained inside. So we've got coffil, that means indentations, recesses in the ceilings, and that celebrates the grid of the steel frame skeleton and the placement of the octagonal structural columns. And I think there might be some original light fittings left. So the original entrance and exit vestibules here, this is where the librarians are based now, but these original entrance and exit vestibules have been extended since then. So the Nelson Hall floor area was about 3,500 square feet, or is, and the ceiling height is 18 foot. And this is where we are now. This was the newsroom, and it had adjustable height reading stands, so actually you could adjust the height and the angle. And the librarian stamped over the racing information to discourage gambling. There were 14 adjustable sloping stands to suit the reader's sight, plus racks for 20 newspapers and table space for 24 periodicals. So this was, I suppose, the equivalent of an an internet cafe, not so long ago before we all started to have it on our own phones. And this is just over 1,100 square feet. And it's now called the Banfield Room, named after the 18th century Banfield House, which once stood on its site. And it was originally all one room before the division went up, and the lift was a later addition. You can see the lift shaft there. And there's some of the original fittings left here, all on the walls. These are some of the original oak fittings, plus some of the original light fittings. Upstairs. And the black band of the, you see above here, that's a very sort of 1930s design touch. And we've got the stepped, if you look at the sort of window frames going through next door, there's a sort of stepped door frame architrave moulded frame around the doorway, again, very 1930s. This is what the first floor looked like. Huge, vast, oops. Oh no, press the button there. So this was the lending lobby. So do you remember I talked about the back of the building being stepped? And that allowed for these laylights, the flat glazing of the roof to allow more lighting from the top. It's 4,700 square feet, absolutely huge. Imagine your excitement in coming into a library with all of those books available for you to browse. Fantastic. And here are some of the fittings and the bookcases. So this sort of modernity continues really. So we've got open bookcases, we've got display ends, we've got bookcases on wheels so that they could easily be rearranged. We've got bookshelves with cupboards underneath them for storage, and we've got a trolley park in one corner where the reserve stock was stored, so you can pull it out and push it back in. You've got these lovely display cases with electrical illumination in them. And all these fittings were made out of American oak by the North of England School Furnishing Company Limited of Darlington for £1,800. And then more of this oak plywood panelling that we see here. The Evening Dispatch of the 5th of March 1940 declared, "It is brightly lit by day, not only from windows extending from the ceiling to within about a foot of the floor, but also from the roof, which is largely of reinforced glass. The walls are covered in flush polished oak wainscot to a height of 7 foot 5 inches. Fittings and bookcases are of light polished oak. Low bookcases have bottom shelves fitted as storage cupboards, so all the books on view are easy to reach. At the entrance and exit wickets, illuminated showcases are used for the display of recommended books or books of current interest. Those readers who prefer to look at several books before making a final choice will be able to do so in comfort at the tables provided for that purpose. There is a card catalogue of names and subjects." Sounds marvellous, isn't it? So here is a plan of the basement and the second floor. So as I mentioned, along Murdoch Terrace was the reference room, and that's a narrow room with windows at the front and a glazing set of 8 and then a pair plus a roof light, so lots of light, and the books and bookcases which cover 3 walls, and it had accommodation for 30 readers. And here's the junior library, which is also narrow with windows at the front and the back, plus the ley light on the ceiling. And this was really quite an advanced idea that children could come and enjoy themselves in a library and were welcome. And this is as it is relatively recently. So the reference and the children's wings are joined at the top of the tower by this beautifully curved piece of glazing, so that the librarian could, in essence, keep an eye on both sides. There we go. So this is Mary and me climbing back with Sonia. Much miss Sonia who's gone to Morningside Library. So there's a fire escape. This is the curved glazing that we saw. So there's a fire escape there. Onto the rooftops of the lending library on the first floor. And really, this is pure continental modernism, and I'm sorry that no one can really see it, but this whole run, that whole band of glazing there, could be, I don't know, Berlin in the 1930s, not necessarily what you'd expect in Fountainbridge. So there's pebble dash, the stone area at the front, pebble dash here, the stripped windows, curved glazing. You think about the Delaware Pavilion in Bexhill-on-Sea and the Luminite factory in Renfrew Road in Glasgow, but it's hidden. And that proportion of window to wall is so generous to allow for light in those reading rooms. That's what's going to happen to Stratford's close now. Is it going to be student housing? Oh, what a shame. So the basement, you have the porter's office, a fuel bin, and 2 staff rooms, and a couple of stores for all those chairs, and the boiler room. And the basement is now home of the renowned Moyer Library of the Scottish Beekeepers Association. If you didn't know, there's actually another very special library in this building. So right up on the top, we were feeling brave that day. There's pitch skylights with this modern curved addition over flat ley lights, and the stepping of the building at the back, and the views out over over Edinburgh, and we think that this bit that sticks up here is to do with the ventilation system. So that's your tour around the building. Now we're going to move on to the sculptor in the title. This is Charles Dorville Pilkington Jackson. He was born in Cornwall, studied at the Royal Institution in Edinburgh and at the New Edinburgh Art College. And in 1911, he set up his first studio at 20 Harrison Road, so not far away from us, just on Harrison Park, with the Browns founder William MacDonald. So in fact, when you know where St Michael's Church is and you walk up the curved road, and at the curve on the left, there's a sort of quite unusual house, like one story. That's because it was a bronze foundry and a sculptor studio. That's what that was. Before World War I, he began a long association with the architect Robert Lorimer, whose son Hugh Lorimer did the McEwen Memorial Plaque in the library about the first concert being held on the site. So after serving in the First World War, Pilkington Jackson set up a studio at 12 Church Lane, which is now Gloucester Lane, and that's where he was based when he was working on the library, and he later lived at 4 Polwood Terrace, so again, not that far away. So, you may not know, but you have seen his work on the facade of Lothian House on Lothian Road. And he made his name during the 1920s working on memorials, including the Allowell War Memorial with Robert Lorimer in 1925. He was also very much involved with the creation of the Scottish National War Memorial, which was led by Robert Lorimer and opened at Edinburgh Castle in 1927. So his most celebrated work there is Ravane, which you see on the right, which is above the entrance exit of the Hall of Honour. But he's perhaps best known for the Royal Scots Memorial in Princes Street Gardens of 1950, and in particular for the equestrian statue Robert Bruce at the site of the Battle of Bannockburn from 1964. So he was elected an associate member of the Royal Society of British Sculptors in 1951, and an associate of the Royal Scottish Academy in 1956. So his work that relates most closely to what he did here was that for Lothian House, an office block and cinema complex which opened in 1936, so really not long before building work started here. The work of Carl Miles was an important inspiration for him, who visited the Swedish sculptor in 1929, whose influence we can see in the work of Lothian House and here. Now, his granddaughter, Kirsty Jackson, has explained about Lothian House and that its architect, Stuart Kay, commissioned Pilkington Jackson to design and make 8 panels in fibrous plaster suitable for sand casting iron, which would be distributed over the entire facade of Lothian House. 4 were to illustrate the industries of Edinburgh: brewing, printing, building and engineering, and 4 were to be seasonal images. Multiple copies of his designs were cast from the mould and slotted into place on site. So that's what you see when you go past on the top of the bus. Pilkington Jackson also made a carving to commemorate the fact Lothian House was built on the site of Port Hopetoun, the Union Canal's original terminal basin. So spot that next time you're walking down, depicting working men and horse on a barge. So, do you remember, I mentioned right at the beginning this carving above the corner door with 1939 on it. He had been told that the library was to be called Fountainbridge Public Library, and had designed a carving accordingly of a fountain under a character bridge. His designs were submitted to a meeting of the Public Libraries Committee in July 1938, at which it was pointed out that the new building was actually to be called the Dundee Street Library. However, as the Evening Dispatch reported on the 26th of July 1938, they found that Mr. Jackson's highly pleasing design had as its central motifs symbolic fountain and bridge. But if the reconstructed library was to be called Dundee Street Library as originally planned, the decoration above the door would be rather pointless and irrelevant. At the same time, it seemed a pity to waste what was a highly pleasing and imaginative study on the sculptor's part. And so the name was changed to Fountainbridge Library. As the artist's granddaughter, Kirsty Jackson, has written, the image has a romantic feel with the turrets on the piers of the bridge and swirls of water beneath, and the fountain with its decorative tumbling beads of water bring an element of Art Deco style. It is an example of how the sculptor could enrich everyday life by transforming a functional piece into something altogether more satisfactory by making it aesthetically pleasing. Also, Pilkington Jackson has included that date in 1939, but it looked like the building would not open until the following year. Sorry, in the design, he had put the date 1938, but it looked like the building would not open until the following year, so he was asked to carve 1939 instead. And in the end, the building opened in 1940. Now we come to the panel on the tower. The rest of the works by Pilkington Jackson consist of bronze-plated, cast-iron, low-relief panels of a god, presumably Christian god, a stylized pattern of papyrus, and a library scene. So between the first and second floors of the stair tower, there is a panel of a half-length bearded man carrying a flaming torch in one hand and a book in the other. And the flaming torch can be read as representing life, truth, regeneration, learning, the enlightenment, think of the Statue of Liberty that she's holding, plus God, knowledge and life. And he could perhaps be perhaps the Greek god of writing, literature and words. Then you'll have seen on the sides, and these were cleaned not so long ago, the papyrus and people panels. So the papyrus reads, that's what paper is made from, on which to print books. And also, there's still incredible craze for anything Egyptian, because Tutankhamun's tomb was discovered in 1922, but it was still very fashionable. A lot of cinemas were still being built in the late 30s with sort of Egyptian-inspired motifs. And then the library scene was this perfect summation of what it was about. I've already described it: the working man, the librarian, the mother and child. I think that should be used as the logo for Edinburgh City Libraries. Again, as Kirsty Jackson has written, the panels relate to the function of the building. Ordinary people in contemporary dress express the message that their library was for everyone. This image marked a departure from the traditional use of allegorical figures of the arts on such buildings and demonstrated a desire to present art that was modern, relevant, and accessible to the average person. Okay, that's what they look like before treatment. So they were originally bronze plated, possibly iron, and were not picked out as they are now, as they are since the 2016 restoration. And it's clear that Pilkington Jackson and John Grant had a good working relationship. In a letter from Jackson to Grant of the 20th September 1938, he wrote, "May I take this opportunity of thanking you for entrusting the work to me, which I have greatly enjoyed and feel help in its accomplishment." I love this photograph on the left, and how the photographer has caught this woman in motion, and how sort of neat and tidy everything was. With the start of World War II, on the 1st of September 1939, the municipal building was reduced to a minimum, but the library was one of the few projects which was allowed to proceed to completion. James Nicholl, member our naughty boy, recalled, "For what looked to us boys, this immense new building did not seem to take long in taking shape. I always remember watching the stonemasons building the corner entrance and was intrigued that they could shape the stone so apparently easily. It certainly was the most beautiful building we'd ever seen going up in our neighbourhood, and we were all proud of it." By November 1939, over 20,000 volumes had been packed and were ready for dispatch to the new library. The building was handed over to the Libraries Committee in late December 1939 so that they could prepare it for opening. Fountainbridge Public Library was opened at 3 p.m. on the 11th of March 1940 by Henry Steele, the Lord Provost. In his speech, Treasurer Darling alluded to wartime restrictions by reminding the assembling company that many of us would have found these months of blackout intolerable had it not been for the consolation and comfort of books. The Provost promptly borrowed the first book from the library, choosing Haunting Edinburgh by Flora Grayson. The library opened with a stock of 25,500 volumes. It had to be closed at dusk as it was impossible to black out the windows. And also, because of the blackout, it was not possible to realise the intention to floodlight the building. So that has never actually happened. On the 15th of March 1939, Grant reported that an estimated final cost of just over £25,000 and only £152 over budget. And it was still referred to as the Dundee Street Library when the library service. Press coverage was wide and positive. The Glasgow Herald declared it of dignified design. The new building is planned on modern lines and is a departure from the usual library construction. The Scotsman said the library is a very handsome building. The Evening Dispatch said the effect throughout is one of light and space. Soon the building was in full use. Edinburgh Evening News reported, I inspected the handsome building on a sunny afternoon. The large games hall was well occupied, and the service the place gives to old age pensioners was apparent, so that old man who wrote into Edinburgh Evening News must have cheered up. The games favoured chess, drafts, and dominoes, cards are not in use. That was another antique sort of gambling. There does not seem to have been any demand for them. In the spacious reading room, one novelty is the perusal of papers by lowering the rank, the reader sitting in a chair. The librarian in charge can see everything at a glance. The highest issue for children's books was 676 in one day. The lady librarian told me the boys were all out for stories of the air, William's series by Richmond Compton, whilst the girls wanted school stories and cheap garments. In February 1941, the council agreed to use the tower as a watchtower with its almost 360-degree views over the city. So do you remember those photographs above the tower with the little windows? That was where they had a lookout. At the height of enemy action, the reference and children's libraries moved in with home reading and never returned to their separate existence. So actually, the full concept didn't last for very long. Amendments made to the building since then include the installation of the lift, a park mezzanine on the first floor, and the dividing up of the lending library. In 1994, there was a reopening, and the 2016 restoration included rearrangement of office space in the library and introduction of lower bookcases to allow more lighting. Now, the newsroom is the Bainfield Room, the first floor is the NHS River Centre, and the second floor is the Citizens Advice Bureau. But many original fittings survive throughout the building, and it's still possible to understand how glorious it must have been when open. As evoked in Natalie Fergie's novel The Sewing Machine, which is partly set here and which you can Thank you. Final slide. And so to conclude, firstly with words from our friend James. The war had come along and all of us boys were now going into apprenticeships as plumbers, electricians, etc., as we were all about 16 years old. For myself, in my first working years, I still enjoyed the new library and have never lost the art of enjoying a good book. And secondly, in the words of Thomas Nelson's son, Arthur Nelson, on the opening of the original hall in library in 1897, when he said that he hoped the library and the recreation room would be much used by the people and that they might in some way tend to give additional pleasure and comfort to their lives, as Fountainbridge Library continues to do so today.